As we begin, we pause to acknowledge the place we exist, connect, and create is the traditional unsurrendered territory of the Abenaki people, one of 5 Wabanaki nations who have a continued and enduring presence with this land. Presence with mountains, vistas, forests, waters, winds. Presence with people, relations, with culture and creations. Presence with light. We learned that in Abenaki, Waban refers to the white flickering light in the sky, and a key is the word for land or the earth. So the Abenaki are the people of the Dawn Land. We acknowledge Abenaki ancestors, past, present, and future. And with this acknowledgement, we commit to engage in efforts that dismantle the impacts of settler colonialism. Good morning and welcome. I want to add just one more spontaneous note. In a workshop that Katie and I did a number of, months ago, somebody said, it looked like we had it all together. And with the Zoom boxes and everybody being here, we do have lots together, but I just want to make a note that the world isn't an unsettled place. And so as a human's first perspective and as a heart, I don't know if I'm saying that for the Zoom space or for myself, but just to name the pink elephant in the Zoom, that the world is kind of unsettled right now. And so I just want to honor that and move into this space, which is what we're going to talk about: digital accessibility, verbal descriptions, and alt text. And when I get into that zone, I'm going to be super excited because I'm really passionate about accessing these things. So with that, my name is Heidi Swevens. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Community Partnerships at Inclusive Arts Vermont. And for access purposes, I'll do a visual description of myself and surroundings. I have blue eyes and pale skin with short brown hair. And today I'm wearing a black velvet button-down shirt and a multicolored buff with purples and I think blues and reds. And behind me is a blank white wall. I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Miller. I'm the Executive Director at Inclusive Arts Vermont. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm joining you from our office today. So I have some beige-ish, yellowish, none of us can really figure out what color they are, walls behind me, with a window over one shoulder and some artwork pieces behind me and over my other shoulder. I am a very pale-skinned woman with shoulder-length silver blonde hair, black glasses, and today I'm wearing a sort of olive green sweatshirt. And I want to start off just by doing a little bit of housekeeping. We already did some introductions in the chat box, but if folks are just joining us, feel free to pop in the chat box sort of your name, where in the state you're joining us from today, and if you're associated with any organization. A couple reminders. So we say this at the beginning of all of our trainings and meetings, and that's to remind you all that we are all humans first, and all the rest of it comes after. So if you need to get up and stretch or turn your camera on or off, be joined by tiny people, big people, animals, whatever, just feel free to do that and take care of yourself as you see fit. And along the same lines, we really encourage multiple ways to participate. So today, if we're sharing things out loud and you prefer to use the chat box, or if you have questions, you can either use the raise hand feature, you can visually raise your hand, and with a group this big, it might take me a little while to see it, but if I see it, I will get to you. Or you could also direct message it to me on here. You could email me a question. So there are lots of ways to get a question to me if you need it. And we are going to ask that the first time you speak today, if you speak out loud, to give a short verbal description of yourself and surroundings, just like Heidi and I did. And my last piece of housekeeping is that I want to let you all know that today's session will be recorded and available on Vermont Arts Council's website within the next week or so, with a full transcript. So if after you see this and you want to share it with your colleagues, you're more than welcome to share that link, which will be emailed to you after the training with everyone you know. Great, I think that's it.
Awesome. So welcome again. And I'm going to just start with the overview of what we're going to cover in this next sort of less than an hour. We're going to start by defining and demonstrating verbal description in alt text. And then Katie's going to do some screen sharing about how to add alt text to multiple applications on the computer. And then we're going to invite you to practice writing alt text. So we've set aside time, hopefully 2 examples, maybe 1, but so that you get some actual practice. And then we're going to go into questions and reflections and talk about next steps. So here we go. The first thing I'm going to do is to give you a demonstration of alt text. So I thought maybe we would start with the experiential part and then go into all the wordy pieces. So I have a computer, well, it's actually an iPhone, and I want you to just listen to this first example.
New recording. Example 1. Yesterday. Duration. Voice memos. Example 1. Text. Play.
Example 1. Try to guess what this is.
IMG-7761.jpg graphic. Play.
Okay,
Button.
so that is an
Play
example of
button.
how a screen reader reads out what something is with software. Could you tell what that is? Anybody know what that image is of?
Lots
Okay.
of no.
All right, so let's go to example 2.
Example 2. Yesterday. Next play. Buck.
Example 2. Try to guess what this is.
One beautiful red and yellow apple without background stock photo. Picture and royalty-free image. Image 944. Pop.
So anybody have an idea of what that image is of?
Yes.
Okay. I think that that's sort of a basic example of, why alt text is important. The first one clearly didn't have alt text, and the second one did. And so as a person who uses screen readers and accessibility purposes, all sorts of other things we'll get more into, the alt text does provide access for the information that's shown visually. And a reminder from the New England ADA Center, for those of you who are in previous workshops, we've said this before, but I'll say it again. The New England ADA for the Americans with Disabilities Act gives guidance, and their guidance is if it's important enough to show, it's important enough to describe. And so that's just sort of a framework for talking about this. So I'm going to try to find my place in the map here. Okay, so now what is verbal description? And Katie has a definition of this to put in the chat box for those of you who want to look at the definition. This is from an organization called Art Beyond Sight. And I'm going to read it aloud. Bear with me if I'm a little choppy. Verbal description uses non-visual language to convey the visual world. It can navigate a visitor through a museum, orient a listener to a work of art, or provide access to the visual elements of a performance. So that's a very specific art-related definition, but essentially it uses, verbal description uses non-visual language to convey the visual world. And that might sound really heady or sort of confusing at first, but the idea again is to, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, offer some of those words, probably not 1,000, just so that somebody who may not be able to see it or who doesn't see it has access to the meaning. The next thing I want to just go over briefly is that we're talking about verbal description, and this is not related. I have a cat who's really wanting to be part of this conversation, so I'm trying to keep them away. We talk about verbal description. You might also see or hear the phrase audio description. And in one disability-led organization, somebody referred to visual descriptions. So verbal description, audio description, and to provide access, there is a orange tiger cat walking in front of me. My apologies. Essentially, there are some technicalities, and if you get into the weeds with it,
Now, disinformation and denial.
audio description is generally, now I've got to turn the volume down, apologies. Audio description often happens in film or television or live theater, where it's actually said out loud. It's an audio track, and it provides visual elements for the people who have blindness or low vision. I use them interchangeably, and you know, they have a technical difference, but I want you to know that audio description, verbal description, visual description, all in essence provides that visual information through language. And that's kind of the point. Does that make sense to people?
It's like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And apologies for Polaris, the cat here. Okay, so now we're going to go into what is alt text. And I think that many of you know what alt text is, or we've talked about it a little bit before, but I was looking for a definition because I have used it, but I never thought, you know, how to define it in terms of telling other people about it. So there's a website called WebAIM, and I love this definition. And again, Katie has this for the chat box for those of you who are visual learners. But the definition is alternative text is a visual substitute for non-text content in websites, documents, and other digital mediums. Substitute. It's a substitute. I love that. And there's lots of places that Katie will get into later to put in this substitute, but you might understand how verbal description kind of takes all this visual, and the alternative text is a digital application of verbal description. The other thing to mention right now is that alternative text has more than that function. For our purposes, we want to stress the access function, but this website, WebAIM, had several others that I think are really important to note, because when you get into the world of talking to others on your team or the tech folks around the functions of alt text, these are important things to consider as well, or just to know about. So there's three things, and Katie has these for the chat. Again, I'm going to read them out loud, so they may not be precise. But the first function of alt text is that screen readers announce alternative text in place of the images, helping users with visual or cognitive conditions perceive the content. And I demonstrated that before with a sort of voiceover. So that's the first function of alternative text. A second function is that if an image fails to download or a user blocks images, the alternative text appears visually for the reader or the receiver. So when somebody's got protections on, the alternative text comes through when the graphics are blocked. And thirdly, search engines use alternative text as a factor in their assessment of page purpose and content. That's a foreign language to me, the search engine thing. I know it's out there, but there's this other function. So what goes in your alt text is being assessed and screened for the online search engine functions as well. Two more things before Katie gets into demonstrating, and I hope we're okay with time. The next thing is that there's something called artificial intelligence that provides automatic alternative text descriptions. They're not alternative text, they're automatic impressions of the verbal description. They are far from accurate, and they do not meet the ADA standards. So if somebody's like, there's this really cool thing where it tries to describe what it is, that is really cool, and it's not precise enough to actually convey the meaning. It might say apple or might be a mountain, and that's not necessarily helpful in terms of somebody accessing the meaning of the image. And the last thing I think is a great transition into kind of where Katie's going to go next and to our practice, but it's preferred and sort of recommended that when you provide alt text, you think about things in addition to what the image is, but the content and function of the image. So the context and function, and that we'll get into more later when we practice, but it's not just that it's an apple. It might be that it's an Apple logo, or it might be that it's an apple in a bucket that's being chopped. So that I'll get more examples later, but context and function are really important when you think about creating the alternative texts. I'm going to pause there and pass it over to Katie. Thanks.
Thanks, Heidi. So a lot of folks, when we talk about alt text, they're like, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I add it to my website? Can I get a quick show of hands? Who here manages your own website? You can either raise your hand visually or just put like a yes in the chat box. And it doesn't have to be you, but you manage it within your organization instead of farming it out somewhere else. Looks like a lot of people. That's very typical of small to mid-size nonprofit organizations, independent artists. There are many, many places that run their own website. So some of the common places that host websites are, there's WordPress, which is what we use at Inclusive Arts Vermont. I think a lot of people use Squarespace. There are lots of them out there. So today I'm not going to go, I'm going to talk about how to add it, but I'm not going to go in the nitty gritty of each web hosting space, how to add it, because honestly, it's different for every place and they all have their different managing things. How I would recommend finding that, and it's usually the first link that pops up. I'm going to share some links with you today that are going to get emailed to you as well. So don't feel like you have to memorize this, but you can just Google your web development platform and then how to add alt text. And that's usually the first link that pops up is the one you want to use. In WordPress, and they have a whole page like within their help section on how to do it. And all of the major social media platforms also have the ability to change and update alt text now, which is really cool. So how to find it. How do you know if an image has alt text? I'm going to share my screen really quick. My goodness, I took a couple weeks off from work and I forgot how to use Zoom. Here we go. Okay. All right. Okay. So this screen on the left-hand side here. Oop, actually, I see that. MC, do you have a question or is your hand raised from earlier? Oh, okay. It was just from earlier. Okay. So on the left, on this screen that we're all looking at here, can folks still see my screen? Yeah. Okay, good. On any image browser, and this is true, I believe it's true in Safari, but in Chrome and pretty much any other browser, you're going to right click any image, or you could control click and that will do the same thing. And it will pop up this little menu here. You know, it says open, save, copy, all of those. All the way at the bottom, it says inspect. You're going to click that and it will pop up this window on the right-hand side that's full of web code, of website coding. It looks really scary. I promise it's not. And you can't mess this up. So it's not like if you start clicking things within this box on the right-hand side, you're going to edit your website. You won't. This is just to show you the code. So once you open that up, you right click, click inspect. There's this little set of double arrows about halfway down this window here. I'm going to click that and click accessibility. And what it's doing right now in this window is it's giving me all of the information about this image. So I can see, I'm going to let somebody in here. I can see what's called the metadata or the data behind the image. One of them is alt text. So you see right here, the part that I'm highlighting in blue says alt. If this has alt text, it will say something there. Sometimes it might say none, or it might say, it might look like an image title. So something like IMG 7941. Those are just the default of whatever was there. So either it was blank or the web host decided to default to the image title as the alt text. But this one, you can see it says a student holds up a piece of artwork covering their face, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you find it. Any questions on how to find whether or not an image has alt text? No, we're all good? Okay. So how to add it? Again, it varies on your web, depending on your website host. We sent out links for the major social media platforms before this training. You'll get them again in the follow-up email that's going to go out after the training's over today. We also sent out a link for WordPress. And again, you can just Google it if you want to find out how to do it for your own web development software, if it's different than WordPress. Typically the alt text varies in style and length, but typically 1 to 3 sentences, I would say, is the average. And like Heidi said, it gives a description of the visual elements and is not an interpretation. So we're not going to, if any of you are like art history nerds like myself, we're not going into the symbolism and the meaning of the apple. We're just talking about the color of the apple. Where is it in space and what does it look like? And you want to keep it factual. And it's also a best practice to include all text in a graphic in the alt text. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second on our social media. As you can see, this is our website at Inclusive Arts Vermont. When we do our alt text, we put it in the back end in the coding. So like Heidi showed earlier, someone who uses a screen reader, it will read that alt text aloud. We also put it as the caption. So it's a visual out there. This part that I'm highlighting right now, that's a caption on our website. And the reason we do that is sort of twofold. One is not everyone who uses the alt text or an image description necessarily uses a screen reader. The other reason is that it's a great conversation starter and educational tool. We get questions very frequently, at least monthly. Hey, I was on your website, what's the deal with those captions? And we can say, oh, cool, let me tell you about verbal description. So it's a really sort of, I would say, passive way to engage in a little bit of education and advocacy with folks who are visiting your website. It's a way for you as an artist or as an organization to advocate for verbal descriptions if everyone can see it in the front. Well, we've got a couple more people joining us. Good morning to those who just came in. Feel free to put yourself on mute, and if you could change your name to your actual name, that would be great. Okay, so we do that on our website. We also do it. This window here is our Instagram. And you can see on this picture at the very bottom of each social media post, we have this thing that says, in brackets, we put image or image description, and then a very short 1 to 3 sentence description of the image. Again, this is because not everyone who could make use of this description is someone who necessarily uses screen reader software. So this is what it looks like for a simple photograph. So I'll read this aloud. It says, image, a photo of Neil Marcus outdoors. He is wearing a gray hoodie and yellow sweatpants, kneeling towards the ground, one hand on his wheelchair and one hand on a tree. He stares directly at the camera. There's sky and grass behind him. I'm going to show you an example as well of one with text. Oh, we'll choose this one. So all the way at the bottom, again, in brackets, it says image, a gray square graphic. At bottom center, a grayscale photo of the Inclusive Arts Vermont management team, 5 people, all smiling at the camera. Above, in bold white writing, it says, we're grateful for you. Here's to a creative and safe 2022. Now, the reason on social media that this is really important is, well, there are a few reasons. The first is you want to go in and update this alt text and add it to your caption because, like Heidi said earlier, there is AI software that will try to guess what your image is of and put in an alt text for you. If you don't put one in, it is very often wrong. So you could have an image of, say it's a simple headshot of me, and it, for whatever reason, decides that it's a black and white image of a flower in the desert drinking a milkshake, like it's like totally unrelated to what it actually is. So you want to go through and edit that alt text, which is really easy to do. I don't think we can do it on here, but on the desktop versions of social media platforms, but I will share with you those links on how to do it step by step, and they're really thorough, which is great.
And can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So you put captions in Instagram, but you can also do the same kind of alt text in Instagram?
Yeah.
That a reader would? Okay.
Yep. So I am going to, once I find it, share a link right now, or a few links. So these are how to update the alt text on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, how to do it in a Word document, WordPress, and an Adobe Acrobat document. Oh, except for the actual links aren't working. So bear with me. Once we switch to Heidi, I'll share those. But essentially, it's when you post it, you can go into an Instagram, I think you go to advanced options, and then you type in your alt text. I think on Facebook it's the same. I believe I would have to talk to the person who manages our social media. It's been a long time since I've done it here, but I believe you can do it through some content managing software if you use those, like Hootsuite and others. And a little hack, a little time-saving hack for you all is to, when you write a verbal description or an alt text, save it somewhere to a Word document, even if you save them all to one place, because then you can go in and just copy and paste it every time you need it. So for example, the verbal description for our logo, it's saved in a Word document. So we're not trying to remember or rewrite it every time. We write one, we know it's good, we copy and paste it every time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I'll say about writing alt text is it can be really intimidating at first, but please keep in mind, everyone has their own style and voice, and have fun with it. If you just peruse our website a little bit, you'll get to notice that there are a few different voices. You know, our previous executive director, Judy, if anybody knows Judy Chalmer, is a poet. And so when she writes verbal descriptions, some of the old ones are still there. They're so poetic and beautiful, and other people are like strictly factual. Some are shorter, some are longer. So have fun with it. Any questions before we move on to practice? There's one in the chat box here. Let me see.
Katie, can I just do a poll, like do a quick thumbs up? How many people here have written alt text before?
Looks like half a dozen, maybe.
Okay,
Oh, more
so
than
this
that,
is
maybe like 10.
so this is new, and in other workshops that Katie and I've done, in verbal description trainings for our mass exhibition and other things, one thing I like to talk about, one is that the practice will be kind of a judgment-free zone, that really it's just a practice. But many people who gravitate towards communications and other things like words. So how many people here like words?
Lots.
Yeah. So when Katie says have fun with it, I think this might be my own interpretation. Clearly it is. But I think that the fun, if you can engage with fun and writing alt text and creating those things become fun for you, that sort of gets translated, whatever your style is. So for practice, we'll keep it in that spirit, but also just know that there's a nice match for people in communications to do this added part with words, and having words, you know, make visuals come alive. So
yeah. And I will add too, so as someone who is a verbal describer myself, you know, before I started working at Inclusive Arts Vermont, I had not heard of verbal description or alt text. Like, actually, I'd heard of alt text, but not verbal description as a practice. And when I first started doing it here, I was really intimidated. I was really worried I was going to do it wrong, or that I was going to disappoint somehow the person that I was describing something for. Then I also wound up having a child, like one of my children was born with low vision. So I use verbal description every day of my life. So that worked out sort of serendipitously. But also, I think as you practice, it will become more and more natural to you. And the desire to try at all, or the desire to practice or put it out there, outweighs the possibility of getting it quote unquote wrong. So if you're feeling nervous about getting it wrong, just know that that's totally normal, and it happens to everybody. Okay, so I put all those links in the chat box. We are going to share them again with you all later. And now that I'm caught up with tech stuff, oh, there was one question. Sorry, let me go back here. Marie asks, when cross-posting between Instagram and Facebook, does the alt text from your Instagram post stay with the post in Facebook? Or do I need to go in and edit the Facebook post to add it? That is a great question. I would hope yes, because they are owned by the same company, but I'm not sure. So when we give you all practice time, I'm going to do some research really quick, and I will get you an answer on that. Okay. All right, practice time. Let's see. Okay. So what we are going to do next is I'm going to pull up an image for all of you. And if you don't feel inspired by this image and you want to practice on something else, that's totally fine. Do that. But I'm going to pull up an image, and give you some prompts to work through practice writing alt text. And right, let's pull up the first one here. There we go.
We have 2 ideas in mind, and our first one was that maybe people could try the same image to see where the variations are. And then if we have time to get to another one, but as Katie was saying, go with where you're feeling inspired, but part of the fun could be to see what different descriptions are of this same image.
Okay, so the first prompt, and I will put these in the chat box too, so don't feel like you have to memorize them. The first prompt I'm going to give you is to write down all of the adjectives you would use to describe this image. So any and all adjectives you would use to describe it. I'm going to give people about 1 minute to do that. And some people are putting theirs in the chat, which I love. Like, let's do that. So if you want to put your adjectives in the chat box to share, it might help inspire other people. I know that when we do verbal descriptions here collaboratively, I think about things in a whole new way. Eliza asks, are we describing the object or the image itself? That is a great question with a complicated answer. And the answer is both and. So you want to describe that it is a color photograph, but you also want to describe what's contained in it. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so once you write down all of the adjectives you would use to describe it.
And Katie, can you just read off some that are in the chat box, or do you want to wait and do that at the end?
Yeah, sure, we can. Sure, why not? A fresh, ripe, red and green shiny apple sitting on a wood surface. Shiny, red, green, light white. A red and green shiny apple in the center of a wood board.
Okay, people are getting past the adjectives.
Yeah, great.
All right, yeah.
Okay, some of the other ones are red, round, green, brown, white, wooden, shiny, brightly lit, red, speckled, red, green, gradient, light, white, shine, shiny, natural, red, green, colorful, photographic, crisp. I love that. That's like, yeah. Clear, bright. What I love when people share their own descriptions is some words that I don't necessarily come to my mind come up, and it helps, I don't know, just sort of make the description richer. Okay, so your next step after you write down all of the adjectives is, what is it doing? Where is it? Does it interact with its space at all? So this is where we're talking about context and function. So where is this apple? What is it doing? I'll give people a few minutes to share. One person said placed on wood. It's a single apple sitting upright on a wood surface.
This is just a side note, but so my way of seeing blah, 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 I had no idea there was wood on that image. So that's really cool to know. It's like the same color as the background to me. So it really looks like just this apple in the middle of nowhere. So maybe just a case in point why audio description or verbal description has impact.
It says on a wood surface, sits upright on a light wooden board. Marie says, I'm a little surprised no one has identified the variety of apple. LOL. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to write your alt text draft. And remember, this is, so I'm going to put the prompt in the chat box. This is 1 to 3 sentences where you combine what is the image of and what is the object or whatever it is doing in space. 1 to 3 sentences, really quick. You can share it in the chat box, or in a few moments. I'll give people maybe 1 to 2 minutes to write their sentences, and then some people can share theirs out loud if they want. Oh, cool. Charlotte said, I was seeing it as red and yellow until everyone started saying green. Okay, so you're going to write your alt text, 1 to 3 sentences, and then share in the chat box. So I'm going to give people 1 to 2 minutes, and I'm going to do my Fast and Furious Googling in the meantime. Oops, everyone's going to use my phone.
I think we'll have time to do a few out loud for sure. I just noticed the time and to get a second practice exercise in. So if you're not somebody who chats, there'll be an opportunity for you to share.
Okay, I'm going to read a few of these out loud. Shay says, a brightly lit color photograph of a shiny red and green speckled apple sitting on a light wood surface. Maria says, a colored photo of a shiny red and green apple sitting upright and centered on a blonde wood surface. A color photograph of a bright shiny apple sitting on a wood surface. A shiny red and green apple sitting stem up on a wooden surface. A crisp photograph of a speckled shiny red and green apple sitting on a washed out surface of pale wooden boards. A shiny red and green whole apple with a stem sits upright on a light, almost white wooden surface. So as you can see, there are lots more, and I encourage you to look through the chat and sort of read them as they go. I'm going to read this last one here. A color photograph of a single apple sitting on a wooden board. The apple is shiny, mottled red-green with a stem pointing up and a small shadow beneath the right. The surface is pale. The lines go between the boards diagonally from upper left to bottom right. The board is in focus in the foreground, but is blurry in the background.
Heidi, I have a question.
Yeah.
My question is, I'm thinking about our colleague who has never had vision. And so a lot of these words would be extraneous for him. So can you help me think through this? Are we writing to be more inclusive of people with low vision versus people who have never had vision? See what I mean?
I'm going to let Heidi answer that one.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to start by sort of saying a couple things about this exercise and then about your question, which is something that Katie and I have heard again and again.
Mm-hmm.
This practice exercise is designed to get people thinking about verbal description and applying it for alt text for digital access. And there was a range, right? Like we're artists in this space, I think, artists and writers and lovers of words. And alt text has the specific function of digital access 1 to 3 sentences. And so that's a concise sort of way. Some of these descriptions may not actually fit into an alt text photo label. But if it's an artistic thing, then it's a whole, there's just some nuances there with the access feature. If you're doing it for art's sake, then maybe you want to have a longer description, and that may or may not fit into the alt text. So verbal description and alt text go hand in hand, if that makes sense. And alt text is one application of verbal description. And that's my starting place. Does that make sense to people?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So then the question of we're using visual language for people who may not have ever seen and might not have a reference point to the visual. And I think that question is probably nuanced depending on individuals, like everything is, but in general, people who have never seen anything have a sense of red. They might have a sense of fluffy, even though it's a different sense. So that philosophical question, I think, varies, but I don't think it's, I'm going to use the word wrong, although I don't like the word wrong. I don't think it's inappropriate to use words that people may not have a visual reference point to, because they might have a different experiential reference point to. Separate from that, or in addition to that, we at Inclusive Arts Vermont do two kinds of verbal descriptions. Again, this is not necessarily alt text, but two kinds of verbal descriptions for our art exhibitions, because sometimes all of the words that describe the beautiful nuances of the art and that people get lost in that. There's too many words that the meaning is not conveyed because somebody's cognitive processing or somebody's attention needs a shorter version for them to have access to it. So we intentionally do short versions and long versions of the art is one example, to provide multiple access points for different kinds of listeners and learners. And that has, more to do with cognitive than visual access. And we discovered that when we were doing a verbal description training many years ago now in the office. And there's this one photo that I sometimes see now, and I still think, why don't we just call that a happy snowman? Because we have all these writers who love words who are like going on and on in paragraphs. And I, as somebody, and this is me, and I love the details, like the stem and I'm drawn into that. But this colleague was like, why don't you just call it a happy snowman? And we thought, oh, right. Why don't we just, I'm getting lost, she said. So we intentionally now do two versions of that for the access points. Does that make sense? And did I lose anybody in trying to explain?
Looks like it makes sense. I did put in the chat box a link to the audio descriptions from our previous exhibition if anyone's curious what like longer form verbal descriptions look and sound like. There's text there, and then they're all recorded as well.
And curiously, the short versions of verbal descriptions actually are also the alt text for the images.
That's what I was going to say, is when we
Oh,
do
sorry.
the short descriptions, it actually serves as the alt text too, which is pretty cool.
I was thinking it would be, as we were processing, I appreciate what you just explained about having two different versions. I think that's awesome, because that was part of what I was thinking while we're making these really long, complicated descriptions of these photos, like that's additional to the content. And when I look at a picture, it's like a really quick intake. And like, as somebody with a visual impairment, if they're reading or, intaking all the information of the body of the thing, plus these really long alt text, it must be like, me as somebody who likes concise, I would be like, you might get annoyed by it. So I see that happy snowman being like the ideal version, but that's of course my perception. So yeah, cool.
Yeah,
I think this links, oh, sorry.
oh,
I was
go
going to
ahead,
say this
Heidi.
links to context and function. So alt text is specifically for the digital access pieces, but in an art gallery, in somebody looking at the Mona Lisa, just to use that example, I don't even know how to describe that. A woman with an undistinguishable smile, that might not get to the nuances for the art world. So the function and context of that has its own place within the art realms and museums and galleries that I think we're acknowledging that is different than alt text. And they do go hand in hand. And we were doing a training. I just want to say that sort of like happy snowman being the ideal. We were doing a training with some college students who were doing verbal descriptions for a gallery installation. And we were playing one from the past exhibit as an example, the long version. And I just couldn't pay attention in that moment. And I noticed it. So it's not this multiple options, these multiple access points. It varies from person to person and moment to moment too. And, you know, people aren't necessarily going to do every single option all the time. But as we're sharing with you kind of why we do what we do, and from our experience of maybe having an aha moment, there's not a right or wrong. There's just, you know, being clear about why you're doing it and knowing that you're going to reach different people in different ways. And if the point is to communicate and to connect, then just being aware of why you're doing it is important, and that it's not going to reach everybody. And somebody might be like, hey, why don't you just call that a happy snowman? And you're like, yeah. Katie, I don't know where you were going to go, but thanks for letting me.
That's
add to
okay.
that.
We've got a couple of hands up. So let's do Shay, and then David, you're up next.
I was just gonna say, first time talking. Hi, I'm Shay. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a pale, fat, white person with long, dark brown braids and a turquoise button-up shirt, sitting in a off-white and wood paneled room with wainscoting and a brightly lit window inconveniently backlighting me. In unflattering light conditions. And I will say that I just wanted to respond to what Dominique said, in that I've recently tried to integrate more consistent image descriptions and alt text in my like social media practice generally. And I've noticed that it really like slows me down and challenges the like immediacy of the culture of constant rapid fire image intaking. Like doom scrolling is just intaking thousands of images, an hour or whatever it can be, right? And so I feel like there is this like value to being concise, of course, because we don't want to get lost in superfluous, endless language. And there is access. There's like a increased point of access for short descriptions, I think, but also it challenges me as a person creating image descriptions and alt text to slow down my like shooting out content so quickly that I'm not considering access. And so I feel like, yeah, there's just, it's not like right or wrong. There's just like a balance that I'm experiencing as I integrate this new practice of like wanting to be concise and short and fast, and also like recognizing that the speed that I have been operating at in my life is like conducive to all kinds of lack of awareness about accessibility. So that's just something I've been reflecting about as I try to be more consistent in that practice. And I also wanted to say while I'm here that I did check while we were talking about the Facebook, Instagram flow, because I have been trying to do this practice in my life, and it does not transfer automatically for me. Image descriptions in the captions, if your captions go over, that can go over. Yep. But the alt text does not transfer. But Facebook does do that creepy artificial intelligence barely alt text, and it says this might be an image of a stocking in an indoor setting or whatever. So that was good for me to know, because I want to go back and edit.
Yeah, thanks, Shay. I tried to Google it and I couldn't find an answer, and then I was trying to cross post from our like inclusive arts Instagram to Facebook, but it's like not tethered correctly to my personal social media, blah, blah, blah. But what I did find out is if you use a program like Hootsuite, which is a social media like content management tool, that you can add the alt text in there and it will go to all of the media platforms you're posting from there. David, go ahead.
Hi, my name's David. I use he and him. I'm a pale-skinned man with blue eyes and blonde hair and a mustache and beard with a green button-up shirt sitting in my kitchen. And I was just curious, obviously all these descriptions are so subjective, and especially I'm sure getting into the art world and longer descriptions, but I'm curious if there's discussion about, like unconscious biases and obviously I have my perspective on the world, and you'd think with a short caption like happy snowman, it wouldn't make a difference, but I'm sure it would in a lot of circumstances. Curious if you could speak to that at all.
Yeah, so we have run into this in a few different ways, specifically most recently related to skin color and verbal description. It came up, oh gosh, a couple of years ago now, Heidi, right? When essentially the conundrum was like, how do you, in relation to, it could be skin color, gender, all sorts of different things. How, when you're writing a verbal description, you're very often choosing to put identifying markers on something or someone. We have come into the practice of, when we can, bringing in, like, so if we're describing artwork, bringing in the artist to look at the verbal description and make edits where they see fit. If we're putting someone's headshot on the internet, that's someone on our staff or board, a volunteer, somebody we know, we ask them to just sort of look over the verbal description and say, what do you think about this? And people often do have edits or changes. I think it is, like most things, complicated and nuanced, and I wish there was a clear-cut answer or way. We have a practice of A, bringing people in, and B, not guessing. If we have to guess, we don't. Especially, I think in terms of when you're describing people, and allowing that space for someone to identify themselves. So if we are going to describe someone, very often we'll use the word person instead of woman, man. And we'll describe maybe the color of skin, but not necessarily add in race, unless we either know, like we've heard from that person how they choose to identify, or yeah. Does that make sense and answer your question? Yeah.
And I just want to add on that absolutely there's power in language. And if you slow down to write about something outside of you, or you're going to notice some biases. We are humans, and there's a lot of this. I think it just parallels some of what's happening in our society at this time, where we're questioning, we're wondering, we're looking at power. And we don't have time or space in this workshop to talk about it, but I love that we get to end with a question around, what is it that you're describing? And is there anything that, was unexamined before you put words to it, especially around people? That was going to be exercise too, but we kind of got into the questions with this one.
Yeah.
Katie and I will have office hours next week if you want to talk about it more. These are questions that are happening nationally and in other places at the intersection of access and, all sorts of other, diversity things, which is one of the reasons we invite, and the practice is to invite people to describe themselves and their surroundings, because that invites somebody to describe how they want to be known in the space. Mm-hmm. And verbal description is the visuals, but people change that in their interpretation into race or ethnicity rather than skin tone. And as we do this as introductions, there's not a right or wrong, but I think it's influx in our world. And so of course it's going to be influx in the practice and the noticing. And you may not always be able to check with the person, but looking at context and function and the words that you use to describe and consistency are just all important things to consider as well with people. So thank you for that question. And I know we're nearing the end, so Katie.
Yeah, there is one question in the chat box I want to get to really quick from Michelle, and it was something I was going to say, and then we moved on. So we came back to it, which is great. Michelle says, I'm curious about the quote, happy snowman phrase. I had been taught that happy interprets emotion, and I should not do that. It would be more appropriate to describe the snowman, what the snowman is doing, like smiling snowman. Is that correct? The answer is yes. Because anything that is a value statement or interpretive of the emotion or the value of what something looks like, you should avoid. And so instead, we would describe it as a smile or a mouth with upturned corners if you really want to get not placing emotion on the snowman itself. And I think the actual description wound up being something like that. It's a piece of artwork. I should go get it. It's a piece of artwork that hangs on the wall in our office. And we don't have a description of it online anywhere, but yes. That's
Yeah.
why, as a verbal describer, when I'm describing things in person, like artwork, I wouldn't describe it as a beautiful painting. I would, because that's subjective, and I might think it's beautiful, but someone else might not. I would describe that it is colorful, vibrant, et cetera, et cetera. Alyssa did have a hand up, and we have 2 minutes. So Alyssa, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, Alyssa Eichler, woman holding a 6-month-old baby, and I'll be quick.
Hi,
I just had
baby.
a follow-up question with the describing people issue. So for instance, I work with State of Vermont Solid Waste Program. I am one of the people who maintains our websites. We do have some images of people that are a variety of races and things. Obviously, the point of the images is not that. It's going to have very specific, like related to composting or whatever. We're realizing we definitely have been negligent about alt text. I would love to start doing an audit and going in and fixing that. But that's just a really challenging area. So I was mostly wondering if you had resources that you recommended to read, since we don't have much time for discussion at the moment. Yeah.
I don't have a resource off the top of my head, Katie, do you? I think it's resources in development. The way I've been learning is by observing what organizations that I look up to are doing in terms of their practice. And I think I can speak for Inclusive Arts Vermont by saying we're sort of in transition with some of that, just like the rest of the world, in terms of our consistency. Some of what was on the website before or past time, you know, I don't know if we identify skin tone in all of them. So the short answer is we will look for resources and get back to you. And I can't think of anything right now because I think it's a conversation that's still happening.
Yeah. Marie asked the question, recommendations for screen readers so we can hear what our alt text sounds like. If you are on a Windows computer, you can go to
Is it Navigator?
Yeah, is it Navigator? Narrator. Okay, so on any Windows computer, if you open up the Narrator app, it will narrate what's on screen for you, and that's screen reader software that's embedded into a Windows computer. On any Mac product, any Apple product, it's called VoiceOver, and you get to that by the settings, and it's embedded in all of them, so you can test it out in here. Okay, thank you all so much for joining us today. We will be sending out an email today or tomorrow with all the links we shared, as well as the link to find this recording when it's available. Thank you so much to all of you for your time and your dedication to this work and being here today. And thank you to the Arts Council and the state legislature for funding this series and making it free to all of you. So we will see you all next week for office hours. Heidi and I will be here from 9:30 to 10:30, just hanging out, answering any questions you have. So feel free to come on and hang out with us next Tuesday.
And if anybody has any last minute questions for today, Katie and I will hang out for a little bit longer today, as if we were in physical space, the lingering.
Thank you.
All right, I think I'm going to stop recording.